Hey, David Brewster here with an episode of Chordplay, and this is the Chords of Joe Satriani. And of course, Joe Satriani is a guitar legend known all over the world. And he's also kind of known as the guitar instructor to the stars because he taught, Steve Vai, Kirk Hammett, Larry Lalonde, Alex Skolnick, and there's a whole bunch of guitarists that, Satriani worked with as a guitar instructor. And I know when I was a kid, and I learned about his educational, habits with all these famous guitarists, I was floored. I thought, wow, that guy must be really good if he taught Steve Vai and Kirk Hammett and all these people. And then when I finally heard Satriani's music, I fell in love with it immediately. It was, Surfing with the Alien first, and then I just dove in, and I've been a fan ever since. And I have brought up, Satriani. I did a kind of a tapped chords, an early episode of Chordplay where we looked at some of his tapped chord ideas, and this is more or less his actual chord ideas, from some of his music. And, for me personally, I, started playing guitar because of Van Halen, and I got into his music, and I started learning all those different chords, a lot of sus chords, and power chords and partial chords. And then I kind of moved over to Steve Vai, and then eventually, when I found Satriani, it was like a Christmas gift. I was like, oh my gosh, look at all these chords. They're everywhere. And there were different tonalities, and there were modal progressions and modal interchanges and key changes and all this stuff, modulations, pitch axis. There's a bunch of stuff in Satriani's music. The opening, that was the song One Big Rush from Flying in a Blue Dream. And you can also catch that song in the John Cusack movie, Say Anything. And I thought that was always kind of funny. That movie, features a little bit of Satriani. And, I've always liked Satriani's, chord vocabulary, his rhythmic approach. Don't get me wrong. I love when he plays a solo. It's very exciting to hear him take a lead. But I've always been interested in what was happening behind the scenes in his music. I could hear, changes in chords and the progression, these tonalities. And I thought, what is all that? And with this song, it basically revolves around E minor, and he's kind of bouncing around with this E minor bar chord, kind of a partial, D, and then a D and a D sus4, and then to A. So it's a 3-chord progression, kind of arranged that way. And then there's a 4th chord that kind of chimes in at the end, which is technically a B minor 7, before it goes back, through those chords again. So I really like that chord play happening right there, pun intended. It's a 4-chord progression, but it's sneaky the way he kind of moves, from one chord to the next, and it's really cool. And then the second time through, he does the same thing. And then he grabs a bigger A. Think of like the Bark at the Moon, Jake E. Lee A power chord. And at the end of that, he still ends up on that B minor 7, which you could play that a couple different ways. I just use my thumb there, almost like a Hendrix rap there with my thumb. And that also kind of mutes out that A string too. Next up is the song Lights of Heaven, which is on Crystal Planet, and I saw Satriani on that tour. Chris Duarte opened, he had Stu Hamm on bass. It was killer, great concert. And this part, actually, this is the kind of main progression after the intro. The intro starts with all these like octaves and this kind of dreamy intro, and it's similar to One Big Rush, where we're kind of playing with these partial chords and pieces of chords, and it's all, kind of arranged like in one, area or position on the fretboard. But it looks and sounds like this. And I really like, that E5 to that E sus4 right there, but it's different than the Van Halen sus4. Typically you'd think of using the pinky and grabbing that A note there on the B string. But Satch flipped it and he's grabbing, A here on the D string, which is really cool. So I really like that kind of movement, which is, different than Van Halen, but it's related because it's still, a sus4 chord. And then he's basically keeping the E there on the G string, moving back to the A note there on the 7th fret on the D, and he's also grabbing the C here, which is technically the 8th fret on the low E string, and that's going to imply a C6, which is really cool. I like that, progression. And then it's going to go to a B7 sus4, which is right there. And then the last thing you hear him do is this, which that would be, what, a B minor 7 add 11, which I love that little, progression of chords there. The next example is pretty simple, but it's very effective, and this is one thing I've really admired about Satriani's, rhythm and chord, progressions, and his chordal work is, sometimes he will play a very demanding, chord or chord progression or a sequence of chords, and then sometimes he just strips everything down to just the bare essentials, and then that way he can kind of fly and shred and play on top of, just those kind of stripped chords. And this is from Surfing with the Alien, the song Crushing Day. And Crushing Day, it's built around C, and then you'll hear like the C power chord, and he's kind of crushing it with the rhythm. But you'll hear the C power chord, and then that G note's going to move back to a G flat. Now you could think of that as a C flat 5, but the song is definitely pulling toward Lydian. So I'm thinking of that as an F sharp, like a sharp 4. So we're really moving back and forth between, a C5 and a C sharp 4 or sharp 11, something like this. And I really like that, just kind of driving, crushing rhythm right there. It's simple. Immediately, it grabs your attention. You're like, whoa, what's getting ready to happen there? And up next we have the song Secret Prayer, which is on the album Crystal Planet. And this is a really interesting, opening or a chord progression or just a chord-based idea. And Joe's basically using these sus2 shapes, those kind of stretchy, add 9, fingerings. And we've talked about those a lot, as far as major and minor add 9. And this is really just the 3-note version, that kind of stripped, sus2 version of that. You can kind of think of that as just a big stacked, power chord. Kind of putting 2 power chords together in a way. But it looks like this. And there you can see we're starting with a G sharp sus2, and then a B sus2, and then a C sharp sus2, and then go to E, and then G sharp, and then there's a B sus2, which that's kind of an unusual fingering. It's a little stretchier because we have to, stretch an extra fret higher on the B string, but that would function as a B sus2. and then F sharp sus2, and then he basically goes to C sharp, and he's also kind of bending the major third there up a half step. And for that bend, I usually bend toward the floor to kind of make room for the remaining notes that kind of pop in there on the D and the A string. I normally don't bend the G string down unless I'm doing something like that. But once again... The next example is from his very famous, Always With Me, Always With You. And I know when I first learned this song, I was a teenager, in high school, and I had never seen anything like that before. I sat there and looked in my book, I looked at my fretboard, I looked at my hand, and I thought, I don't know if there's a way to do that, without a capo or something. I thought, what am I trying to do here? So I busted my butt, trying to play that, which that's a B at 11. When I first encountered that chord, I couldn't do it. It was that index finger. I could do this part, no problem. But then I had to get this index finger over there, and I thought, what? So that's tricky at first. It's like an Alan Halsworth chord. And, definitely not something you just grab, out of nowhere. You have to kind of work on, building the strength and dexterity to make that chord happen. So that's the first shape, and it's kind of, cleaner, kind of palm muted. Almost like you're whispering, when you play it. And then there's an E major 13, and then an F sharp sus4. So there's this little 3-chord sequence, that opens that song. More chords kind of thrown in. But if you really want a big chord, bass challenge, play the rhythm part to that song. I know the lead and the solos and everything are a big distraction, but if you really want to change up your practice, habits or whatever, jump into that song, but only play the rhythm parts. And it's really hard. Like, it's not easy. And you might be thinking, whatever, I can do it. But if you dive in there and actually learn the real chords, that's a challenging, rhythm guitar part. Last example is actually one of my favorite, Joe Satriani songs. This is Lords of Karma, which is from Surfing with the Alien. And there's a lot of his music that I really like. I love the song Echo, and there's a bunch of, his songs that I like. But this one's always grabbed me for some reason, and I think it's mainly the chords, which is why I've, kind of included it here. It has this very spacious, kind of futuristic, proggy kind of sound that I really like, and I love when he kind of dives into that world of, chords and tonalities and sounds. And I do like the bluesy stuff, when he kind of turns into more of a blues, with some of the boogie, kind of riffs and stuff like that. But I really do like when he taps into this kind of space sound, where it's like, whoa. And the opening chords right off the bat, it sets up the mood and kind of the sound for the whole song. But we've got an A sharp 11 for the first chord. And then it's going to move to an A13 sus4, which we're just kind of doing this 2-chord, progression there. In the same song, the interlude to Lords of Karma is brilliant. When I hear this, it's just like, oh my gosh, I love everything going on, during this part. So it starts with an E13 at 11, which right off the bat, you can, even just before you hear the chord, just hearing the name of that chord, you're pretty much guaranteed it's going to be bizarre. So it's basically living right there. And then it's going to move to an A flat sharp 11, which is very unusual. Right off the bat, those 2 chords are very weird. But I love weird chords. Then an A minor flat 13. And then it's basically an F major 13. And then you're going to go back to that, G13 at 11. Kind of adds that G note there on the top. And then right here, this is really unusual. That would be a B flat major 13 flat 5. And I really love that progression, moving from here. Kind of a neat, little chord weighting there. And then go back to that A minor 9. And then right there, technically the chord's going to change to a G. And that's a huge stretch right there. And if you want to, you can try to grab that. And it's going to go back basically to that F major 13, and then it just ends with an E7. But I really like that sequence of chords. It's beautiful. Going to wrap this look at the chords of Joe Satriani, and I'm obviously a huge fan. I've been a fan of Satriani since I was in high school, and I still really, get inspired and interested, when I hear him play. And there's just a lot you can learn from somebody like him. Obviously he's a guitar instructor at the Stars, but if you check out some of his instructional material, maybe dig into some of his music, and start learning, some of his ideas, I guarantee you'll come away a stronger musician. And either your technical facility or your knowledge and understanding of how you can kind of tap into some of these futuristic sounds and interesting textures and tonalities. And he kind of helped me open that door, which I was already a big Van Halen and Zeppelin and really into David Gilmour, and got into Dream Theater and stuff, John Petrucci. But when I got into Satriani, I could feel like this door open where it was like, oh my gosh, there's all this, new information. It wasn't, completely foreign, because I could hear him using like pentatonic scales and, blues licks and stuff like that. But then there were all these other sounds that I didn't recognize. And I thought, what in the world is that? And then I'd try to learn it. So, brilliant guitarist, very inspiring. And a legend, really. I mean, Joe Satriani is a complete guitar legend. So anyway, leave some feedback and some comments. Please subscribe to Late Night Lessons, and I'll be back before you know it with more lessons and material. Thank you.